For the reading of the word, let's go to John chapter 11. And, we started talking about Bible quizzing. I'm going to give you the easiest verse in all the Bible to memorize so we can start on that, all right? John 11, chapter 35. Everybody there? All right, now try real hard. Look at the screen. Now close your eyes. Let's quote it together. Jesus wept. Got one verse down. Let's say it again. Jesus wept. You may be seated. The interesting thing about this verse is that John wrote it about 60 years after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And the intriguing thing about all of that is we have the miracles, we have all the stuff that Jesus did. But isn't it amazing that some 60 years later, Jesus put into John's mind two words that would be penned into the word of the Lord. Those two words being Jesus wept. And in other words, Jesus shed tears. Jesus shed tears. We talk a lot about the human body, and the human body is really, it is amazing. It's almost uncanny, the body's ability to repair itself. Take the heart, for example. Do I have a title up today? Yep, go ahead and put it up there. The title is, for those who have to have one, Tears Have a Harvest. Tears have a harvest. But anyway, take, for example, the human heart. Man has made mechanical pumps. We've tried to make valves of the heart that are as good as the original, but they never are. They have a point where they just don't work anymore. Our nervous system has the ability to process information at a speed greater than any computer that man has ever been able to develop. Take our lungs, for example. Our lungs have the ability to make oxygen with blood, therefore giving us the very breath of life to live. But if each one of us here are honest this morning, when we think of the human body and everything that this body, this tangible body can do, I bet that many probably don't think of the importance of tears. The Harvard Medical School put out an article last year titled, "Is Crying Good for You?" The article says that while crying is a natural response to a range of emotions, sometimes tears will come with sadness and grief. Sometimes tears will come with overwhelming joy and elation. But regardless of the reason for the tears, crying has benefits to our health. You can go back to the ancient Greeks and the Romans, and you can read the philosophers and the thinkers of the time, and they would posit that tears actually purified the body, that when you cried, you got rid of disease and you got rid of impurities. Advance that now a couple thousand years, and psychologists today would tell you that crying is a mechanism that allows us to release stress. How many of us have stress? How many of us have emotional pain? Tears and crying allow us naturally to release those things. And so modern medicine would agree and tell us that tears have a purpose. Pain is often that gift that ushers tears into our lives. Consider this: if we were tearless, we could neither see nor blink our eyes. We need tears to lubricate our eyelids. When we cry, our tears have different chemical makeups. For example, if we cry because we're hurting physically or emotionally, a protein is released in our tears. Tears bathe our eyes with something called lysozyme, which is one of the most effective antibacterial and antiviral agents known to man. And so this week, I'm just wondering if there's anybody here who's ever asked the Lord this question: Lord, why am I crying? I wonder if there's anybody in the sound of my voice here today that in the darkness of a painful hour, a moment when you're alone by yourself, you've asked the Lord this question: Lord, why am I crying? And if that is the question that you have asked yourself, like a broken record that runs through your mind continually, I believe the Lord has the answer for you today. You're crying because he's preparing you for a harvest that you will not be able to contain. You are crying tears because God is just preparing you to receive the greatest miracle of your life. And the question God is asking each and every one of us: are you ready for the harvest? Are you ready to get what I'm going to give you? Are you ready to reap what you've sown? I want you to know that God takes special notice of your tears. If you go to Psalms chapter 6, in verse 8, the psalmist would say, "Depart from me, all you workers of iniquity, for the Lord hath heard the voice of my weeping." You may think you're crying in silence. You may think that your tears hit your pillow in absolute silence, but let me assure you, God hears the voice of your weeping. Your tears have a voice. Your weeping has a voice. You may be crying in your mind out to God, but your tears and your weeping has a voice. I wonder how many of you have thought, as you laid down at night, that God has turned a deaf ear to your cries. Has anybody ever been to the point where you seem to have prayed the same prayer and again and again and again there's no answer in sight? Have you ever asked God, God, are you there? God, do you care? And God, do you hear me? You're convinced that he neglects you. You're convinced that he doesn't see the countless tear stains on your pillow. But the Bible assures you, and it assures me, that God does not neglect your tears. He does not ignore them. He does not cast them aside. But your tears, in fact, cause God to act. Your tears, in fact, cause God to act. Take a look at what David said in Psalms 56. If you have your Bibles, everybody go there. Psalms 56, verse 8 says this: "Thou tellest my wanderings, put thou my tears into thy bottle. Are they not in thy book?" The Message translation would say this: "You've kept track of my every toss and my every turn through my sleepless nights. Every single tear you have entered into your ledger. Each ache is written in your book." The Living Bible translation would write this: "For you have seen me tossing and turning through the night. You have collected all my tears and preserved them in your bottle. You have recorded every single one in your book." Now, it's important because we have to understand what's going on here. David's sorrow at this point was so great that he was telling God, "God, my sorrow and my tears are so many and so heavy that you are going to need a wineskin to hold them. And we have to be careful that we understand what these bottles represent. In Roman times, there were little bottles called tear bottles, and you would cry your tears at the death of a loved one, and you'd take these little bottles and you'd lay them at the graveside of your loved one, and they were called tear bottles. But David says, look, I'm not talking about a tear bottle, because I've cried too many tears for a tear bottle. I've cried too many tears for that little bottle to put at the grave of a loved one. Lord, you got to have a wineskin. In language of 2022, Lord, you got to get a Home Depot 5-gallon bucket for my tears. Anybody cried tears like that? Come on, I know I'm not the only one. You've cried too many tears for a little bottle. You felt like that all you do is cry, and you think, God, aren't you hearing me? But David would write that God not only puts our tears in a bottle, but like the great accountant, he accounts for every single tear that you've ever cried. Every tear of pain is accounted for. Every tear of fear is accounted for. Every tear where you don't think you're anything of significance is accounted for. Every tear that has come from your eyes is in a bottle in heaven, and each tear is labeled and accounted for. One of the great reluctances of our day is that we don't show anyone that we cry. Society teaches our young boys men don't cry. Tears are seen as a sign of weakness. But let me assure you, young man, let me assure you, young woman, your tear is not a sign of weakness, but your teardrop will actually summons the King of heaven. Rather than being ashamed or disappointed, that God that created the universe, that same God that healed blinded eyes and raised the dead, that same God that sees the sparrow when it falls and has every head on your head numbered, he stops and he takes notice of your inner turmoil. He'll stop creating worlds, he'll stop creating turmoils, and he'll take that tear and he'll store it and he'll account for it and say, there it is. There's a tear of pain. There's a tear of joy. Every tear that you shed is accounted for in God's economy. David tells us that God cares so much for you, that not a single tear goes unnoticed. Not a single tear is ever forgotten. You know what a ledger is? In the age of computers, we really don't know what a ledger is anymore. But a ledger, if you've ever watched, who is that Mr. Scrooge? You know, there was the accountant, you know. What was his name? Yeah, but the accountant guy. Anyway, yeah, there you go. They had these big books. All right? You kids know what a book is? It has pages. You turn it actually with your fingers. And you take a sharp pencil and you'd write an account. Well, Kendall came in today and deposited $20, and she took out $50. And they'd write that down in there. And they'd put a big negative -30 in your account. Every transaction was accounted for. Well, what David's trying to say is the exact same thing. Every tear that you cry is accounted for in God's ledger. When you cry, he's writing that down, and he's saving that, and he's taking note of that. So in our moments, we don't think God hears us. God's actually busy writing it down into his memory, because someday he's going to use that tear. If God didn't need your tear, why would he need to store it in a bottle? And not only are your tears important and go noticed by God, But those tears represent your sorrow. It represents your struggle. It represents the burden you're bearing. They represent the pain in your heart. And he just keeps an account of that. Some people have wine cellars. I don't know if you've ever been in a really nice wine cellar. A number of years ago, my wife took me to somebody she worked with. They had a Christmas thing or something. And this guy was crazy. I know Scott's back there, and Scott's like the Hot Wheels and the Matchbox connoisseur. And this guy, Scott, had a whole part of his house that was temperature controlled, special rider on his insurance, had special connection to the fire department if there was smoke or a fire, and it was filled with nothing but Matchbox cars, all in the original box. Now, I can appreciate that because I was an only child, and my mom, God love her, she didn't want any of my toys to get dirty. And so I don't have the original boxes, Scott, but the only places my Matchbox cars from the 70s have ever been played are on my mom and dad's carpet in their living room. And so I was fascinated with this guy's Matchbox room. And then he had a Star Wars room. Again, Luke Skywalker and I don't know, I don't watch it, but just all in the original boxes. It was like a museum. And then he had a wine cellar. He had bottles of wine that were over 100 and 200 years old, worth thousands and thousands of dollars. And I got to thinking about that this week, and I thought, if that guy was so content and so intent on making sure that his wine is okay and stored in the bottles just right, how much more does God protect our tears in the bottles of heaven? Your tears are not by happenstance. Your tears are not just something that naturally occurs, but your tears are for a purpose. Because your tears are getting ready to produce a harvest. He keeps track of them. Psalms 56:9 would say, "When I cry unto thee, then shall mine enemies turn back, because this I know, for God is for me." Somebody say, God is for me. Say it like you believe it. God is for me. And so when tears flow down like a river from your cheeks, and when you cry to God because you don't feel you can go another day carrying this burden, when you scream at the top of your lungs in that pillow because the pressures of life seem so great and they feel like they're literally squeezing the last breath of life out of you, remember what the psalmist declared, that God is for me. And I believe that it was this verse in Psalms 56 that Paul would remember when he would write Romans 8:31 that said, if God is for us, then who can be against us? Let me tell you, if God cares enough to save your tears in a bottle, there's no devil in hell that's going to come against you that's going to prosper. There's no devil that's going to defeat you. My kids were on Facebook in the car on the way to church, and Martin Ballesterio, you may remember it, he preached here a year ago. He put on his, I don't know what you call it, Facebook, I don't know. But this is what he wrote this morning. It's so fitting for somebody here today. You can't climb a smooth mountain. You can't climb a smooth mountain. What do you mean? You see, if you tried to climb a mountain that was perfectly smooth, you'd never leave the bottom of that mountain. But see, sometimes you need the jagged rocks to grab onto. And you need another jagged rock that sticks out here to put your foot on and put your foot here to get to the top of that mountain. Your tears are not wasted. Your sleepless nights are not wasted, because God is trying to tell somebody, I'm letting you cry and I'm collecting your tears because I'm getting you ready for a harvest. God sees your pain. God sees your tears. And I'm sure that when Paul was ridiculed, he must have shed some tears. Amen? I'm sure that when Paul was imprisoned in a Roman jail and he was hungry and he didn't have any of his friends to be there, I'm sure he must have shed some tears. Amen? I'm sure when Paul was falsely accused for crimes that he didn't do or things that he did in the name of the Lord and he was facing death, I'm sure that he must have shed some tears. But just like Paul would tell us years later, those tears were not wasted and they did not go unnoticed, but they were stored and they were recorded in the annals of heaven, and they were accounted for one by God himself. And so as I get ready to close, I want to finish this thought. Yes, I said getting ready to close. Not only does God store those tears in bottles, but those same tears will be used to reap blessings in your life. You're saying, what in the world? You are off your rocker. Go with me to Psalms 126. I'm telling you, your tears will one day be used to allow you to reap a harvest that those tears have sowed. Psalms 126 verses 5 to 6 says, they that sow in tears. I want everybody to stand to your feet right now. I want you to read this with me and declare it like you mean it. They that sow in tears shall reap in joy. Say it again. They that sow in tears shall reap in joy. Say it again. They that sow in tears shall reap in joy. He that goeth forth and weepeth, bearing precious seed, shall doubtless come again with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him. Let me tell you today, you may be sowing tears, but tomorrow's coming and your weeping is going to bring forth seed, and you're going to come rejoicing. Why? Because you're going to reap a harvest. The New English translation would say, those who shed tears as they plant will shout for joy when they reap the harvest. The one who weeps as he walks along carrying his bag of seed will certainly come in with a shout carrying the sheaves of grain. I get it. When you're out in the field, you're carrying that bag of seed. That bag of seed is heavy. And you got to understand what the psalmist is trying to tell us here. Because when you sowed seed, you were taking food out of the mouth of your children in the hope that seed would grow. You were carrying that heavy bag of seed on your shoulder, hoping that when you came to that ground, you'd be able to till that ground. And Brother Jason plant a little seed. Brother TJ, I would come to that ground, and that bag of seed, it's so heavy. It's so heavy. And I'd plant my seed, and I'd say, Lord, I hope the birds don't pluck it up. I hope the tares don't come, choke up my seed, because this bag of seed is heavy. This bag of seed is burdensome. And I don't know, maybe I fall along the way because I can't handle it, and I cry and I say, God, please let this seed that I've planted, God, please let it grow. And you plant your seed and the farmer stands back and the rain doesn't come. And maybe I'm talking to somebody here today. You've carried that heavy bag of seed on your back for a long time. That bag of seed for your lost loved one. That bag of seed for a family member that's lost their way. That bag of seed for that healing that never seems to come. That bag of seed with a seed for a victory that you never see coming. That bag of seed for that desire of your heart that you don't see now. That prayer that seems to carry around and you just cry and cry and cry. But all you got is planted seed and tears. Here's what God is trying to tell us today. Not only does He account for every tear that you've shed, not only does He store every tear and keep it in heaven, but there's going to come a time when He's going to take a bottle of that tear and He's going to pour it out on that seed that you planted. He's going to take it out on that prayer that you prayed, and He's going to say, listen, I've stored all those tears. I've stored all the tears. I've heard all the prayers. You've planted. You've been faithful. Now I'm going to take that bottle. I'm going to take that bottle of tears. All that sowing you've done. All those tears that I have stored up. I'm going to pour it on what you planted. I'm going to pour it on that seed that you planted. Because what you have sown in tears, you are going to reap in joy. You have sown the seed in tears, and now God is pouring your tears back out of that bottle, and He's watering your ground. He's watering the soil. He's taking the nutrients of the Spirit and putting it back in your life. And so it's time that we look at tears for what God says they are. It's time that we look at tears for what God sees them as they are. God sees your tears as tomorrow's harvest. God sees your tears as tomorrow's deliverance. But we may have to shed tears today. We may just have to reap, sow in tears today, to reap a harvest tomorrow. Are you willing to carry that bag? Are you willing to carry that bag of seeds, Mama? Are you willing to carry that bag of seeds, Daddy? And keep planting and keep crying? Sir, ma'am, are you willing to keep carrying that bag of seed and planting them in your marriage, planting them in your relationship? And are you still willing to cry those tears and let God store them and keep storing them? I get it. He may store them for days. He may store them for weeks. He may store them for months. And oh God, He may store them for years. But think of it this way. The more tears you've had to shed, just means the more tears God has had to collect. And it just means more tears that he's going to pour out on the seed that you've sown. So that thing that's small today is going to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. And so today, let's claim that promise that what I sow in tears, I'm going to reap in joy. Because I may go forth today and weep. I'm bearing my seed. I'm bearing my prayer. I'm taking my prayer and I'm planting it. But the psalmist said, doubtless it will come again. You know what that means? Without question, what you started with weeping will come tomorrow with rejoicing. Why? Because you're going to come with rejoicing, bringing sheaves of grain. So let's sing. Let's just take a moment and raise our hands all across.